In this lesson, I want to talk about shot balancing and matching shots. Now, obviously, that's going to be very important in this situation where we have an office scene where we have our two talent talking to each other, and we're going to need to make sure that the shots look seamless when cutting back and forth, so that's going to require us to do a little bit of matching. Now, before we get rolling, I am going to come up. You'll notice that I have these two clips flagged. I'm going to come down and only view the flagged clips, just so it's a little bit easier when we're switching back and forth. And as we know from previous lessons, first thing we're always going to do is we're going to add that curve to our shots. We're going to add a second note. I'm going to right click. I'm going to come down to LUTs. We're going to add that RE Alexa log C to Rec 709. Do the exact same thing on our next shot, Option or Alt and S. And there we go. Now remember, we apply the Alexa LUT on these shots because that's the LUT the DOP watched his light through on set. Using the same LUT is the only guarantee that we have that we'll see the image the same way that they did when they were shooting. That said, there's nothing wrong with shaping your own curve or starting with a film emulation lookup table, but it's generally a good idea to know where we're coming from, and often the DOP wants to see that as a starting point. Now, let's take a look at these two shots to see exactly what's going on here. Now, we sort of have this overall yellow look that's happening in between the two shots. Now, the yellow is actually impacting the shots in a slightly different way. If you take a look at this shot here, overall, this shot is a little bit brighter than the other shot. However, you'll see that we got a lot of yellow happening in his shirt, a lot of yellow happening over here on the board, and even a lot of yellow happening in the door, which is not quite what we would want. Now, taking a look at our other shot, you'll notice it's a little bit darker. However, take a look at the paper in behind him. That's looking pretty white, so we're already on the right track with this shot. It's just a little bit on the dark side. All right, so how are we going to get in and balance these shots so that they're going to match each other? Before we start out, I want to point out that balancing means adjusting the color so that the image looks more natural, not necessarily correct on a scope. If the yellow color cast that we see in this shot works for us, there's no rule that says we have to neutralize the white balance. It might be gels or decisions made on set. Sometimes we also deliberately ignore the balance for artistic reasons. Think about that blue hour in the morning or evening. It's supposed to be blue and it's perfectly natural, just as a sunset shot needs to stay nice and warm, so keep that in mind. Well, the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to navigate over here to my waveform dropdown, and I'm going to switch this over to Parade. Now, Parade is a very visual way to see exactly what's going on with the red, green, and blue channel, and as you can see, we're a little bit blue deficient here. Our blue channel is a little bit lighter than the other two channels. Now, I think this is a good place to stop and just talk about a concept that I think is important for you to understand when getting in and deciding, do I want to pull back on red and green, or do I want to add more blue? You need to think about what the consequences are of those two different actions, because they are very different in the sense of how your shot's going to look. If we get in and add more blue to this shot, we increase the blue channel, we're going to increase the overall brightness of the image. If we bring down the green and red channels, we're going to darken the overall image. So this is what you're going to need to consider when you're going to decide what you actually want to get in and adjust. Maybe you want to bring green and red down ever so slightly, bring blue up a little bit more just to keep everything as far as the brightness goes more or less where it is. What I'm going to do for the purposes of this shot is I'm just going to add a little bit more blue. Now you'll see that we already are on our primary bars. We can do this one of a couple ways. We can just grab the value and just start dragging however much we want. I'm just going to, it's actually already reset itself to 25, because what I want to make sure of here is that I have my printer light hotkeys turned on. I'm going to make sure that I have node 1 selected. Now keep in mind, I only have the full point value of the printer light hotkeys turned on. If I wanted more precision, I would get in and have the half point and quarter point ones assigned to my keyboard as well. I'm just going to increase the blue value ever so slightly, not too much, and I think if I go 3 points, well, you know what, 3 points is actually not too bad, and you'll notice that we've helped balance this image out a lot more than it was before. That's what it was before, this is what it is now. You'll see it just helps give it a little bit less of a yellow feeling to it. Makes everything look a little bit more quote-unquote normal. Now something else that I want to show you with this shot, I'm actually just going to reset this node, and what we're going to do is switch back here to the primary wheels, and I'm going to switch my scope here over to my vector scope. A vector scope is a tool that I think is always sadly underutilized by a lot of colorists when they're starting out, because right away we can see that something is going on with the image, because as you can see, the image color is skewed a little bit over towards the warm side. And what I'd like to do is just pull it back. And to pull it back to compensate, all we're going to do is grab our crosshairs here, and as I start to grab it and pull back, you'll see it move right away in the vector scope. And what you're also going to notice is that the values are changing. Red, green, and blue. I'm going to try to keep it somewhere around what I had it at before. You'll notice that as I'm dragging, I want to keep it somewhere roughly close to what we had it at before, which I think is probably about here. And now you'll notice that if I come in and I hit the D key to turn that node on and off, you'll see we have a noticeable difference. Now the only catch here is that you'll notice that as I was bringing the blue channel up and bringing down the red and green channels, it actually made the overall image darker than what I had it at before. So now you can start to see how the impact and how you choose the technique you're going to use to adjust the color is immediately going to have an impact on the brightness of the image. All right. I'm actually just going to reset this node. I think I'm just going to punch in the printer light right back to there. We'll just increase the overall brightness of the image. I think that's good. Even 29 might be pushing it a little bit, but I think that's good for this shot. All right. Let's switch back to our other shot now, and let's quickly correct this one. Now, keep in mind the technique is not going to work any differently now than what we had done before. If we're going to be using our offset, I'm simply going to come in. You'll see we're not exactly centered up here. I'd really like more of the bulk of the color to be right dead in the middle. So let's do this. Now, obviously, by doing this, the problem that we're running into is you'll see the red and green values are coming down even though blue is coming up. So we're actually making the image darker. And in this case, I don't want to do that because the image was already dark to begin with. So let's reset by simply double clicking. Let's switch on over to our primary bars. Let's use our printer light hotkeys here. I'm just going to increase the blue values a little bit here. And what I'm also going to do is actually just increase the overall red and green as well, just to make this look a little bit on the brighter side. I'm just going to switch back here to our parade, and you'll see this is already looking much better than it did before. Now the big question is, how does it compare with our other shot? And you'll see these two shots are now pretty darn close to each other as far as matching goes, brightness and color. So I think this is pretty good and a pretty good place to leave off these two shots because they're balanced pretty darn close to each other. All right. One thing that I want to mention before moving on to the next lesson is that balancing doesn't have to mean forcing blacks to be completely black and whites to be completely white. That's one of the biggest mistakes inexperienced colorists make. In the real world, blacks aren't always completely black, and we can certainly say the same thing about the highlights. It's about finding a neutral starting point, good separation, and that center of attention, often the skin tones, that look good.